This time on the Prop Master, we'll be trying to make sure that when Boba goes to take a shot, something like that doesn't happen. I mean, that's problematic. Okay, so this is more like it. That's going nowhere. And it's all because in this episode, we're going to start working on this lower cuff area here, which holds everything nice and secure. On a negative note, I'm afraid I'm going to have to apologize yet again for some of the video quality. I'm still getting those weird rainbow aliasy glitchy things all throughout the editing of the video. It started last video when my phone updated, but I'm not able to update my version of iMovie on my 10-year-old iMac. So everything's fine on my phone. It's just when I transfer it over, I get these little weird glitches. So still working on a workaround on that. And unfortunately, until I get that figured out, there's going to be some weirdnesses in the video. On a positive note, thank you, Krister. Krister is my first my first patron on Patreon. If I'm butchering that name, just let me know. But thank you very much. That really helps a lot in making these videos. I also want to remind all of y'all out there to go ahead and subscribe to the channel and like the videos. It really does help the channel quite a bit. I'm trying to get to 30,000 subscribers so that I can do some things with YouTube that they won't let me do until then. So it doesn't really affect you in any way, but it really helps out this channel a lot. But we've got a lot to do on this thing, so let's get started. Okay, so before we get started putting this together, this is a small enough project that we can kind of talk about everything you're going to need. The first thing you're going to need is something that you can use as a platform. Nothing this elaborate necessary. This is just an old shelf that I rescued from the trash can during a kitchen remodel. Something that's rigid, that's all you really need. You're also going to need a little strip of wood that's at least 3/4 of an inch high, is reasonably square, and by that I mean, but it's not parallelogram. You don't want any kind of skewed angles. And it needs to be just shy of 2 feet long. You're going to need your templates, and I would go ahead and print out 2 copies of your templates, just because there's a good chance you're going to want to come back later and cut some other pieces out to make sure your shapes are good. It'll make more sense later. And the crazy thing is, of all these parts, this is the only part we're really, this is the one part we're making right here. Everything else is just supportive. So you're not going to be putting this down on one sheet of something and cutting everything out. They're going to be kind of different, each different things. For this piece and these 2 little pieces here, you're going to want to have a 1/4 inch thick Sintra or PVC foam or some kind of 1/4 inch thick thermoplastic. This unfortunately is one of those times when you're not going to be able to use wood because we're going to have to mold this into a shape, and the only way we can do that is with plastic, unless you're really good at steaming and bending wood. So you're going to need some Sintra or some other PVC foam or some equivalent to that. You're also going to want some of this. This is Warbler. This is also a thermoplastic. It's a bit more readily available. You can find this at Michael's, Hobby Lobby, most hobby places and art supply places are carrying it now in their cosplay areas. Unlike the Sintra, this is actually designed for cosplay and for other hobbies, that kind of stuff. So it's much safer to work with, it's much easier to work with, and it's, you know, more available. So you'll need a little bit of that because this is going to be the sort of the inside piece of the cuff. For these pieces here, you're going to need something in the neighborhood of a 1/2 inch thick wood. Here's another piece that I salvaged from the trash. It's a fiberboard as well, but plywood will work. It's, you know, not for show, it just needs to be structurally strong. And, you know, enough for these 2 pieces. And that's good for your basic materials. You will also need a piano hinge. One of these that's about, it's probably a little over, well, it's about 1 foot. So 12 inches. This is fine. This is fine. If you can find 2 smaller ones, that's good too. We'll end up cutting this in half, but you know, it's still going to work out just fine. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we just need to go ahead and you want to separate these 2 pieces from the rest of it. Then you can go ahead and glue this down onto your Sintra, and we can glue this down onto your 1/2 inch thick wood and cut everything else out. And I think we've done that enough times in this project that we don't need to see that. So we'll just basically turn these into this. So we have that by itself. We have these 2 in 1/2 inch wood, and these 3 in our 1/4 inch thermoplastic, or, you know, basically Sintra. And the main thing we want to worry about right now is this piece, because what we're going to do now is build a jig. And instead of gluing this down, we want to go ahead and just outline it, because we're going to be gluing things onto where this paper would be if it was glued down. So we're going to have to go back to tracing around this. I don't know why I decided to need to go this way, but I did. Just tack down the corners. Now, ideally, it would have been better if I printed this out on thicker paper, but we'll make this thin paper work. I just want to outline around it. And we want to go ahead and label this. At least, you know, front and back and right and left. So the first thing we want to do is we take these 2 little strips here that are made out of our thermoplastic. They don't technically need to be made of thermoplastic, but they do need to be the same size, and so this is just the easiest. Here's my right side, here's my left side, and if you look here, they're labeled. This is right side, so it goes over here, and left side goes over here, and this is the front, so it goes this way, and this is the front, so it's that way. We want to just go ahead and glue these down. That's down, so we want to glue them on the outside of the outline. So basically right there and right here. Okay, so there's basically our foundation. Next we want to take our strip of wood and take some measurements. Basically, we just want to lay it up on the outside and mark, you know, the same, roughly the same size. These don't have to be perfect, but you know, roughly the same size as these pieces. And cut those out. We have these two pieces cut out, and we just want to glue them onto the outsides, or basically onto the wood on the outside of the pieces of foam. Like I said, they don't have to be perfect, they just need to sort of, you know, be there for the most part. You do want to make sure that you are sticking the, you're gluing them so that the wood sticks up above the Sintra. Next, you want to go ahead and glue these pieces in place. And you just want to, let's hope these actually fit. If you notice, this one says it's the front face facing backwards. This faces backwards, so like this. And this actually fits well in here, so we're going to go ahead and put it all the way in between so we get good support. This is the back face, and it's facing forward, and this side is facing forward, so it goes like this. Yeah, it's not going to fit all the way in here. I want to make sure that I don't encroach on top of this piece here, but we can get about halfway, and that's good enough. But you definitely don't want to get this on top of that piece. I hope you can see that. So we'll go ahead and glue those in place. Okay, that's as far forward as I can get it. Now we just need to measure this space, because I didn't know how far this was going to move in. I couldn't tell how long to make the inside piece. So now that we have that information, I can go ahead and mark this. Don't make the tolerances too tight. Give yourself a little bit of extra, you know, cut this piece a little bit short. You don't want it to not fit and have to cut it again. So same thing here. There's where I could mark it, but I'm going to move it a little bit, make that tolerance not quite so great. Or I should say, tolerance not so close. And go ahead and cut these out real quick. I'm going to mark this one with the left side, so I'll know. I mean, it'd be pretty obvious when I tried to put this piece in there and it didn't fit, but we'll cut these out. I have these pieces, and they should fit inside here without too much trouble. Okay, and we'll go ahead and glue those in. So now you can see that basically we're making a place to trap the plastic in each side. Okay, so there's our jig right there. We're ready to go ahead and bend this piece. Now, so before you go in and bend your Sintra for the cuff, we need to go ahead and do some work on the inner lining of the cuff. This is a piece of Warbler that we looked at earlier. And like I said before, this is, unlike the Sintra, this stuff is actually made for crafting, it's made for cosplay, and as such, it's a lot easier to work with. We won't need any gloves or anything. I'll take my heat gun, and I'm just going to heat it up. It comes in a roll usually, so there's usually going to be a curve like this, so you're going to have to relax it. Also, if you'll notice, there's a shiny side and a matte side. And I like to put the matte side down because the shiny side gets sticky, and you know, you don't want it to stick to whatever surface you're working with. I'm working for this from the center section out to the edges, just to relax it. I'm probably about 4 inches away from it. It doesn't have to get perfect. When it gets darker in color, it gets really soft at that point. Not necessarily a bad thing, it's just, you know, information. Okay, and now I just want to, now that it's reasonably flat and I can work with it, you also feel it's a little tacky. I'm going to go ahead and heat this center part up to where it's a little darker. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half. The color change is more dramatic on the camera than it is in real life, so don't expect it to get super dark. And I'm going to take this and just fold it in half. And some of these parts here where it's still pretty light and stiff, let's heat that up because I want to make sure it sticks well. That's what's great about the Warbler is it's, unlike the Sintra, we haven't just folded this over into a taco shape. This is very much akin to forge welding. We've basically made, for all practical purposes, a sheet of Warbler that is twice as thick as it was. Because not only is it in that shape now, it has adhered to the other piece. So it's like one piece. It's a bit more delicate than the Sintra. I mean, you can stretch this into different shapes and everything. So you have to be a little bit more gentle with it. It is sticky, so it's going to grab whatever it can. Now take your cuff outer layer. Let's pretend this has a piece of Sintra stuck to it and that I haven't forgotten to do this and already bent the piece. And of course, if you do that, you can always do like this and just cut another pattern out. It's not be too wasteful. So you just want to lay it out, give yourself some room. Because I don't want to mark this right along the edge. I'm going to come out, you know, maybe a ½ an inch all the way around. That way I can come back and trim this later. And you don't have to be exact about it. I'm just eyeballing it. Just maybe make it a little bigger. This, of course, is where it's actually going to stick out past the rest of the unit, so make sure you have plenty of room there. Everything else I'll end up trimming off later, these other sides. So this one you definitely want to make sure you come out, you know, at least a ½ an inch. Everything else, just make sure it's a little bigger. Now we can go ahead and cut this out. Some scissors will work fine on this. So with an X-Acto knife. But scissors or shears are going to be the easiest by far. I really like these shop scissors by Fisker. This stuff's also excellent for wrapping around things, so you can make them out of something else, foam, EVA foam or something like that, and then wrap them in this stuff and it becomes hard. So if you're making horns or things like that, this is excellent. Okay, so now that we have this, we can set it aside. Just for the heck of it, let's go ahead and mark it. So that's the way it goes. So we'll go ahead and mark left side and right side. Front and back's pretty obvious. And set this aside and we can get back to working on the main outside cuff. Here's where I have to kind of decide what I'm doing. Originally, I know that I cut these pieces out first. However, that results in, I don't know if you can see this, there's some distortion in each one of these. It kind of balloons out in both directions. And that is definitely caused by this being weak when it was bent around here. So I'm thinking that I should probably bend this first and then mark it and cut it out after it's bent. At this point, I'm just trying to decide whether or not I should use the pattern and mark it now or use the second pattern that I printed out after it's bent to mark it. Let's go ahead and mark it and just see what it does. We're not going to cut it out, but let's go ahead and just poke some holes and sort of mark outlines here. I think the easiest way to mark this is going to be to go ahead and use an X-Acto, and we'll just run over these lines. I think we can go ahead and pull this whole thing off, because when it bends, I don't want this paper stopping it from bending. Okay, so we're ready to bend this. The more I look at this, the more I have some concerns as to whether or not this front is too big and I've got something wrong with my calculations, but we'll find out in a second. So I'm going to heat and bend this Sintra. I've been told by several people that it's not a problem to heat Sintra, to heat PVC, but I've also were told by the people that sold me the Sintra that heating up PVC releases chlorine gas. So got my fan going, got a mask on. I'd rather play it safe than sorry. So I'm trying to decide how I want to do this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the heating process over here, and then I'll put it there and start to bend it over. I see. I want to make sure that's in. I got that piece way too hot. Probably the worst place to get it too hot too, right? Where I want that detail. Now I'll do this half. I would just be getting way too close. I'm being very clumsy here. I think it's pretty safe to say that I've got too much material on the front of this. The back's not too bad. Okay, so I think I'm going to make an alteration to the pattern and we'll cut out a new piece with the new pattern and we'll start over. So let's try this again. I did take a look at this piece, the original templates, and I had intended to make this larger intentionally because this piece here is actually 1/4 of an inch wider than the original prototype that I made, just so it would fit a little better. And when I looked at my measurements, it looks like I'd accidentally extended this not 1/4 of an inch from the middle out, but 1/2 of an inch from the middle out. So I fixed that on the template and cut this piece out. But that really, 1/4 of an inch doesn't really explain how much larger everything was, especially in the front. So I really tried to get into the headspace that I was in originally, and I finally did. I'm pretty sure that what I was going for was that the idea being that this basically is mimicking what this is like. And if you notice here, this side is substantially higher up than, I guess it's even with the back here, but it's much higher than the front. So that means that instead of having the ramp side over here, that needs to be the just sort of rectangular piece that is much higher. So I took that from here, moved it over there. Well, actually I had to make new pieces because they broke up, but the rectangular piece goes over here. The sort of ramp triangular piece goes over here, and not only that, I had it backwards. It needs to be the big end over here and the very low end here, to mimic what's happening on this one. And that gives us the extra distance, especially here in the front. So everything should work now. And I've relabeled everything, so just follow the labeling that's on the template that you get and it should be fine. So what basically happened is, it looks like I probably labeled that just looking down on it originally over a year ago, and wrote this as the right side and this is the left side, not thinking about the fact that that didn't really fit up with all the rest of the templates. But it's all rectified now. This should work. This is all put back together. Obviously this did not come off very cleanly, so I put it back together here. And let's give this another try. Oh, one last thing before we do that. I don't know if you can see it here, but this interior piece sticks out away from this piece here. It has the corner right there. And I'm afraid that's actually might show up a little bit. Same thing is here. Not so much here, but here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take that edge off a little bit. It's not really necessary, we just want to kind of hold the plastic in piece. We just kind of want to hold the plastic in place. So I'm just going to take this. Ideally, I guess you'd want to just take this corner off a little bit before you glue it down. So when you get ready to put these pieces in place, if you notice there's a corner sticking out past where these pieces are, you want to take that corner off before you glue these down. But let me do this real quick and then we'll get back to work. Okay, so as you can see, I just kind of took that hard, sharp edge that was sticking out right here and just kind of removed that. It doesn't have to be super smooth. I just don't want a real hard edge sticking there that's going to put a crease in the centro when we try to bend it. Same goes for over here, so that it's all kind of lines up with that piece there. Now back here it wasn't as important because it was kind of, you know, lining up perfectly with this piece anyway, so no need to do anything there. So like I said, it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, just get rid of that hard edge that might cause a crease mark. Okay, so you'll also notice that I did not scribe the little ladder pattern in here. I wanted to avoid the situation I had on this one where it got too hot and it opened up those gaps, or those cuts. So instead of doing that, all I did was mark the edges here for position of where that is, and I'll come back and draw that in after we've bent it. Also, to avoid that overheating, I've changed this from 100% heat down to about 80%. And I still think what I'm going to try to do is to get this thing fairly hot before I put it in there, and then you know, try to continue the bend on, and heating it as I bend it. If you actually have two heat guns, that would probably be more efficient. I do, but I want to go ahead and try to do this with one, just because I know most of y'all don't have two heat guns. Make sure I've got left side matching up with the left side over here. It's starting to bend. As it's bending, I'm just moving the heat further up. I'm pulling the end about an inch from the surface of the centra. I'm a little bit far out on this side, so I'm going to heat it back up and push down some more. Now you'll notice this is trying to bend toward the back. I'll have to come back and adjust that. Just try not to get like one finger pressure somewhere. You're going to end up with an indentation doing that. Now, I'm going to pull this out and let it cool for a second. And then I'm going to do the same thing starting from this end over here. I'm trying to get this to bend along the front edge. It wants to bend further forward, so I'm going to have to pull back. Now I'm going to start over again with this end. Now it's just a matter of trying to gently coax it in all the way, you know, in both sides and in the right place. Hot. So even though these are Nomex gloves, they're a little thin for this. Some of those oven gloves would probably be better. So I'm just trying to gently coax this side forward a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I'd be willing to say it's never going to be perfect. You just want it to be pretty close. Or, you know, as close as you can get it. Okay, if you take a look here, you can see it's not perfect in here or back here, but it's pretty good. So it cools off just a little bit. I can pull that off and see how it fits on here. Now it should line up. This side is weird because, as you can see, it's just a weird shape compared to everything else, but once the flame unit's on here, it doesn't really matter. So it just needs to kind of line up in the back. But it should be flush on the outside, and it should line up on the inside of this side over here. It should line up in the back, and it should be a little bit short in the front because we're going to have that piece on the inside that sticks out a little further. And I gotta say, that's looking really good. I'm not squeezing it or anything. It's got an okay shape. It's not like a weird shape that I don't like. Okay, I'm happy with that. This probably could be a little bit scary. Just realize that it's you just kind of have to work with it. Keep going until you're happy with it, and you know, you're gonna mess up, and that's okay. Even this one with the burn marks and everything, if I didn't have these expansions where I cut through this originally, I could easily use this. You know, once you prime it, and the filler primer stuff will fill in all these little marks, and this would work just fine, actually. So go ahead and make mistakes and just work through it, and you'll get it. Now that we have this piece bent into shape, let's go ahead and connect our marked lines here so we can get that position set. Okay, so that's where our little ladder feature is going to be. And with that marked, we can go ahead and kind of straighten out these ends. Right now they're a little bit, if you can see, there's a little wavy in here, out, and then in, and similar here. It's kind of an S shape almost. So we can go ahead and, it doesn't have to be perfect, but kind of get more of a straight shot there. And there are a few ways you can do that. We'll just try a few. One good way to do it is if you've got some sandpaper. This is 60 grit. Lay it down, and you could just kind of this will automatically work on the high areas while leaving the low, you know, the high the parts that stick out will get ground down, and the pieces that are not will be left alone. It's always a challenge to hold on to it. You just want to try to keep everything even so you're not grinding away on one end and not the other. It's already quite a bit better. This is also just my 60 grit sanding stick. Files also work well. This is pretty soft stuff, so it sands pretty easily. This is actually pretty straight now. Let me just try the back. It's a little bit more wonky. So you can kind of see that I've got a little bit of a, it sticks out from here. And that would probably look a little better. Obviously, if you had a couple or a larger sheet of this that was glued down to a board, it would make things a lot easier. Okay, and you just do that until you get a fairly nice straight edge. Let's go ahead and put this down now and grab our second template. Let's take some scissors. Well, let's cut this center section out. This ladder section, I guess. And so here's our little piece here. And if you get to this point and your marked lines just don't look right, what I'd say is kind of hold it up like this, and if it doesn't look like it runs down sort of the way it should, like, or maybe if this was too far to the right and it kind of went diagonally across there or dove down toward this corner here, then don't follow them. They should be good, but if they're not, I mean, go ahead and just lay this down where you think it should go and go from there. And because of all the movement that we've done, we've, you know, sanded stuff here and we've bent everything. This is now a little bit long, and that's totally fine. I'm going to try and get this sort of in the middle so there's a little bit hanging off of the back and the front. And some tape would probably be a good idea. So I'm just going to take some tape, do that end, and then do the same thing on the other end. Make sure that it's tight. Okay. And I'm just going to mark the reason why I'm doing that now instead of earlier is just in case there was any distortion. I want to make sure that I'm getting this nice and straight now and not having any kind of wavy distortion or, you know, anything like that. So I want to carefully remove this because I'm going to want to use this template again. Set that aside. And let's just connect the dots here. It's actually where a flexible ruler would come in handy, or in this case, I'm just going to use this piece of Bristol board. So you say I do have a little bit of a defect in there. That's okay. It'll just look like a dent later on. Might even play that up with the paint. Now the important thing is that I've got the lines going all the way across, so I've got marks on both the center section and on the cuff itself. And originally I was going to drill holes and cut this out, but I think it'd be smarter to just go ahead and cut this whole thing out. And we'll have 3 pieces. So I'm going to do that real quick. Okay, so here are my pieces now. I want to go ahead and mark them. Probably should have done this before I cut it. I'll just say, and it's the little areas you want to mark. So I'm going to say A1, A2, A3, and A4. And I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll say B1, B2, B3, and B4, and that's just to make sure that I get the orientations of everything, position and orientation of everything when I put this back together. And when you're cutting this out, you can use whatever you've got. You know, this works really well. So coping saw, band saw, jigsaw, whatever. Just make sure you're using a very thin blade. If you got, I mean, you could go crazy and try to do this with, say, a chop saw or a miter saw. And not only do I think that would be incredibly dangerous, but those thick blades would cut so much material out of here that when you put this back together, this would be tiny and the whole thing would be like maybe 1/4 of an inch too small. So make sure you're using a saw with a very small blade. And with that said, let's go ahead and now cut these sections out. So we want to lose these 3 sections. So I'm going to cut these 1, 2, 3, and 4 pieces out. Okay, so here are our pieces now. And I've got some 120 grit sandpaper. They don't look very square, but I think it's just because of the change in angles and things. We're hoping. And I just want to soften you don't necessarily want to alter the whole thing, but just round the very corners off just a little bit. On the top only. Okay. Now we can also do the same thing on this edge and this edge. But just the, like before, you don't want to do the whole thing, just the very top edge, right here. Check on it occasionally, just make sure you're not getting too much on one area and not enough on the other. Still pretty sharp along here. Okay, that's looking good. Basically what I'm trying to do here is to do this fact, the fact that you can see these little, lines going. It's not just a square cutout. We actually have some lines going all the way down. So everything's got a bevel on it. And it looks like we're pretty good now. We can go ahead and start putting this back together. So that weighs up on everything. Looks pretty good. Make sure that you line it back up the way it was before. Make sure it's flush on the bottom. Glued my finger down to the bottom. There was a problem there. Shouldn't take a lot of glue. I'm using my finger to make sure that everything's flat on top. You can see that there's not a lot of glue there. Could have made my lines a little bit more visible. I guess I sanded a fair amount of them off. I'm mostly going to worry about making sure that it's flush on the ends. I also need to work on making a jig for this. Okay, now what I'm doing, I'm making sure that everything lines up, but I'm focusing on just one of them. I'm holding it good down here at number 4, and I'm looking at number 1 to make sure that it's in the right place. And I'm just waiting. So close. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna spray a little zip kicker there. You probably will not have this problem. I'm not exactly sure what's happening here. The problem with this is it's going to cure almost instantly, so I have to make sure that I'm in the right place. I've glued my finger. There we go. Okay. Now I can worry about gluing the rest of them. Just pulling it out a little bit so there's a gap. Put it in place. That was just weird, but we got it. Okay, now that I've cleaned most of the super glue off my fingers, we can clean this up a bit. Now we have this piece and our piece of Warbler. So I'm going to lay this down that way, and here's where our markings were. So this goes down that way as well. This will fit inside there. Left side to the left side and right side to right side. Got my heat gun. So even though there is a smooth side, a glossy side and a matte side, both sides still get sticky. The really smooth side just gets tacky a lot quicker. So I don't want you to think that because the smooth side's not here that this isn't going to stick to that. Because it definitely will. Not to burn myself with the heat gun. Now when I put this in here, I want to make sure that it just sticks a little bit out in the back, and most of it is sticking out of the front. So even in the back, there's a little bit sticking out there, even though it's pretty darn close. Make sure that it fits down in there everywhere. If you need to heat it up some more, go ahead and heat it up some more. Although it stays workable for quite a while. Now, remember, we're going to need this part to stick out further, so try to keep that sort of straight, at least up close to the outer cuff. Just kind of pushing it to make sure that it's in contact everywhere. Be careful near your holes because you don't want to push those sticking out. So don't put a lot of pressure there. What I'm doing now is I'm just kind of gently pushing around the outside of where the holes are. If you get a big warp in the end of this, we can just heat it up and straighten it out. Okay, it's starting to stiffen up now. Just waiting for it to stiffen up, cool off. Okay, we'll give that a few minutes to just completely harden up and cool off and harden up. Waited a few minutes and now this is nice and rigid. We can take the scissors again and just trim everything. Now don't trim the front, but trim the sides and the back. Try to keep this edge in a straight line. You don't want to suddenly veer up into that. Gonna use the top of the scissors to line that up. If you get a little off, you can clean off the file as well. Peeling up a little bit. I'll just put some glue down there to hold it together. Just be sure not to cut into the centra. Some in there. Try to get the glue down as deep as you can. I mean, if it didn't stick, somebody, you might be able to actually peel the whole thing out and then just glue it back in. If it's not that bad, then I wouldn't worry about it. And just do like I'm doing here. There's just a little bit of a gap there. I'm going to take this piece and kind of line it up the way it's supposed to be. I just want to mark it on the front here. Just kind of want to mark the point where it lines up with the end here. Take a measurement. In my case, it's pretty much right at 1/2 of an inch. Results will vary slightly. So I'd say somewhere between 1/2 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch is probably going to be where you are. Now, I'm just going to eyeball it. I mean, if you had a little piece of tape that was 1/2 of an inch, I could just run it down there and use that as a straight edge, but I'm going to use that as my line and trim that off. These are hard to cut with scissors because of the fact that it's concave, or convex in this case. Concave this way. So I'm starting to drift. A Dremel with a wood cutting wheel would do a good job here. Just don't want to use the little emery board cutting wheels because they're going to basically just melt their way through. But if something has teeth, it will cut pretty well. In fact, I mean, that will obviously work. I'm starting to get a little bit offline there. I think I'm going to get my cutting wheel real quick. I've got it on a different Dremel, so I'm going to go use it real quick. Okay, so that's trimmed off. Round off any sharp edges. Okay, I'm going to continue to clean up all these little edges around here, and then when I'm done, I'll be back. Okay, we've just about got this all cleaned up. Now is also a good time to deal with any of these that are off a little bit. If one's sticking a little proud, then smooth this all out good. Okay, and really we're ready now to just attach this. I'll set it this way. Hey, if you like this video or found it helpful, why not go ahead and give it a thumbs up? And of course, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos. You can also click that little bell so you'll be instantly notified when new videos come out. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. You know, it's really your likes, comments, and subscriptions that motivate me to keep this channel going. So, until next time, thanks.